There's always a lot of debate about caliber and the most effective, I say that air quotes, the most effective round for self-defense. And I don't know. You're going to get as many varied opinions as there are assholes. I mean, there's just like billions of them, right? Billions and billions of assholes. And some common arguments are, is a 380 better than a 9 mil? Is a 45 better than either those? Or, is a 22 round a good self-defense round? And then there's obviously the people who are like, oh no, screw it, let's just get the Smith & Wesson 500 Magnum, right? And when it all comes down to it, each one of these rounds, each one of these calibers have the potential to do massive amounts of harm, and for sometimes different reasons, right? Now, I would say that if I have to categorize them, then the 380 and 9 mil, just by virtue of the fact that the 9 mil is just a little bit longer casing, that this is kind of like a distribution, if you can think about it that way. 22 has a propensity when it hits flesh, if it penetrates into cavity space or things like that, to tumble, right? And it's just because it goes pretty fast, but at the same time, there's just not a lot of mass to it, right? So it'll just bounce around and hit things, sometimes in lungs, sometimes in your chest cavity or things like that. Sometimes it'll lodge in your heart, and it'll cause some damage, right? And it just depends also if you're using like a hollow pointed round or not. And 380 and 9 mil, they have a decent amount of powder behind them, and they definitely will mushroom out. But the question is, with these, is how much kinetic energy is being transferred from the projectile, the bullet, into your assailant, right? And this applies also to hunting as well when you're choosing the most ideal round, right? And you have something like 40 or 45, where, I mean, we're talking about a significant difference in projectile size, and also the charge that propels it, right? And in the case of like a 45, the kinetic energy that's going into a person or thing, it could be an animal, right, is massively larger than something like a 22, right? And then we have the 500, which is, I mean, honestly, just plain retarded. I mean, I wouldn't want to be shot with this, but at least I would know that it would end quickly, for the most part. But you're talking about a large projectile. This one's 500 grams, right? Backed by a large amount of powder. And there's pros and cons to each. Very, very low recoil, lots of capacity. Smaller projectiles is a con, right? Just because of the amount of rounds that you would need in order to do a large amount of harm. When you're going up to the 380 and 9 mil, not as much recoil as something like the 45, right? But then you won't worry about kinetic energy and how that's going to transfer into the assailant, right? They call it stopping power, for whatever that means. I've always made the argument with just about everybody that I've talked to, that if I put 3 in your face and 4 in your chest, then you're not going to care what kind of round it is necessarily. Most, inevitably you will be dead, but it's just one of those things where we kind of get into semantics and pissing matches over which caliber works best. I will say that 45 in certain types of weapons makes a very ideal round, because it's a recoil can be minimized to a certain extent in things like my Colt Combat Commander 1911, right? Shooting 45 out of there, I really don't have a whole lot of problem. Also on my Glock 21 SF, that is a pretty decently balanced out round. When you get up to the Smith & Wesson 500, I would say that the largest disadvantage is the recoil. I mean, it's ridiculous, and if you see any YouTube videos out there, you'll know that it's a massive, very powerful round, right? But it's almost impractical for self-defense because of how large that charge is and how large the projectile is. In the time that it would take you to reset on a target after one round, let's just say you missed, it could be too late. Now, personally, I wouldn't have any problem as a backup gun having a 22, especially with a high capacity mag. I mean, something that, I can fit 20, 25 rounds in, something like that. I mean, ballpark 20 rounds. I mean, if you can place all of your shots and get lung and vital shots, or even in the head in a lot of cases, I mean, if it's a life or death situation, you just want to go for kill shots, right? Then 22 honestly could do a considerable amount of damage, and I don't think a whole lot of people would argue too much with you if you shot them 20 times with it. Personally, my concealed carry in my Sig Sauer P238 Spartan uses 380, and I think it's a reasonable round for that frame. It's almost as much recoil as a 22 in a composite stock, right? And 9mm is the same way. I mean, I really like the Glock 19, even as a concealed carry piece with certain types of holsters. And, 45 is just, it's a balanced round. There's a lot of law enforcement officers that shoot in 40 or 45, and it's perfectly acceptable. You just have to worry about recoil, right? It's like, how quickly and effectively can I fire that round, hit my target, and then reset if I have to place other shots, right? So, I would say that overall, all of these rounds can save your life if you need it to. There's some that are a little bit more ideal than others for certain situations, and I don't deal in a whole lot of absolutes, right? I think that there's a certain gray area, especially when it comes to ammo, just because there are a lot of effective rounds out there, and for handguns especially, and all of these that you see, I miss out on the 40 because I don't have any with me, but all of them are effective rounds. I would feel more comfortable with a little bit less recoil and a little bit higher capacity, only by virtue of the fact that I think that I feel more comfortable with placing shots when I have less recoil and less to contend with. You might be a one and done with the 45 and make all the impact that you need, and that's great, but there's also the odds that you might not ever place a shot effectively, depending on whether you practice a lot, whether you have an effectively balanced gun and whatnot. So it's something to consider. I would not listen to a whole lot of people that deal in absolutes to say, a 22 round is not an effective concealed carry round. Specifically, I mean, there's lots of hitmen that will use a 22 round. It's it's a round of choice for being stealthy. There's not a whole lot of crack to it, especially in a pistol, and you can get away with a lot. I mean, just in organized crime and whatnot, it's used fairly often, and there's a reason for that. It works close quarters, close range. It does exactly what it's supposed to do, and that's caused harm. And these rounds for self-defense, I wouldn't have any problem as well. I have a few 45s that I conceal carry from time to time. I have more 9mm and 380s that I trust just as much. So again, take certain opinions with a grain of salt. It is your preference, and you have to be able to feel comfortable with the round that you're going to fire. Conceal carry guns specifically are very much custom tailored to the type of carrying that you're going to be doing on a regular basis. So be mindful of that. Don't believe everything that everybody says. Be smart and be diligent in trying to discern what's fact and what's crap, and what's just kind of baseless opinion, or not based on logic per se. But yeah, I mean, something to consider.